Sect-Machina is a self-described Metroidvania game, essentially a platformer with a hint of combat, set in a cyberpunk world inhabited by bugs. It's made in Unreal Engine by Skelly Crew Games, and is a 2D side-scroller with pixel art. The main thing that drew me to review this game was the mixed reviews on Steam. I like a bit of controversy, so thought I'd throw in my 2 pence. It loads up into a menu with pixel art and suspenseful music, your character striking a pose next to the few options. You can start, there are settings for master, music and sound effect volumes, and an option to quit. There are also the credits, where you can see a team of about 14 people put this game together, and there are some dedications to the assets used as well. I started a new game and loaded into what seemed like some kind of bedroom, with my character and some spooky kind of music. A few photos around that may have been some bug family relations. Enter issue numero uno with the game. There is no tutorial. As I already didn't mention, there are no controls in the settings menu, and there's also no tutorial to teach you them either, so the first few minutes of the game were spent poking my keyboard like a hungry child at a sweet shop window trying to find what everything did. W and S are to look up and crouch, A and D are to move left and right, Z is also to look up for some reason, E is to attack with your club, and I is for your inventory. Space is to jump, and space twice is to double jump. That was all I could find from there. There's also a HUD in the top left with a lumpy full bar and a flat empty bar. That didn't tell me much either, so I went outside. A bug with a beer bottle told me not to go into the city else I be killed. Or maybe not, or maybe so by a praying mantis. But that was all, and then I jumped off a building. Here I found you can wall cling / wall jump by holding a direction key against the wall and spacebar. If you just attach to the wall without jumping, you slide slowly down it. For some reason, on the outdoor walls, your grip is about 3mm displaced from the actual wall surface. In general, this doesn't impact much, but it might have some bearing on a later point. You can smash crates with E, which doesn't do much apart from fill the blue bar at the top of the screen. I didn't know what it did, so just continued looking around. You can also find blue square things floating that you can collect. There's no indicator to tell you how many you have, nor what they do. At first I thought they also filled your blue bar, but I think they don't. Not much further away you start encountering enemies which you can hit with the bat and kill. You also get blue charge from hitting enemies as well. I can't really talk about this game linearly, so I'm going to have to split it down into its elements. The story, the mechanics and platforming, the combat, and the design. Let's go to the story first. There isn't one. The end. I jest. If you just play the game, there actually isn't a story. You're a thing with a bat that hits crates and other bugs. Some bugs are hostile, some are not. Why? Who knows? The second to last area is a market with bugs trying to sell you unknown things and cybernetics for ridiculous prices. Who are they? Where did they come from? Who also knows? The world building is sort of covered in the design, with the many ads and neon lighting and run-down, dingy cities. You don't see any cybernetics on any of the characters, but you get a few flashes of text talking about it, and also some bug puns. The only place to find any element of story is the Steam page for the game. If you read that, it says your character is a butterfly disguised as a moth for protection reasons, but you don't know who it is that would target you for being a butterfly. You're curious to find out, so venture into the dangerous bug-hosting city to find the answers. Spoiler alert, there are no answers. I don't know if someone lost the script and they decided to cut their losses, but I'm gonna warn you now, none of those questions get answered. It only explains why the logo is butterfly-shaped and why you're so colourful under your cloak on the title card. In the final area at the marketplace, you go through a door and it jumps straight to the credits. No text, no nothing, just a dead end. The mechanics now. Ignoring the initial fact that the game doesn't tell you how to control it, there were some complaints about the controls in the Steam reviews, but I actually didn't find them too difficult. Once you figure out the distinction that you can't double jump off a wall but you can from the floor, some of the platforming areas become easier than they initially appear. Your platforming segments are generally just jumping between flat areas. Nothing moves, nothing drops, it's all pretty stable. There's a main course to follow through the game to get you to the end area, but some areas are wide and look like they have a lot of paths. The alternative paths you come across usually lead to a tucked away area where a blue square is, as a bit of a challenge or exploration to get you to find it. In some areas the platforming is easy to get there, some it is a bit more precise, and you might have to crawl back into the main area with S so you only have one way into that area. First of all, the wall climb. In general it's got decent length, the grip slips fairly quickly, but most walls you interact with are very long. There are some walls, however, in an area with scaffold, where you need to grip a short length to get up and you have to get the jump in fast enough. Remember earlier I mentioned the grip can be a few mil out? This is actually a gift in some places, because you grip some invisible air at the bottom of the platform edge to be able to jump up on. Saying that, it's sometimes luck if the grip actually registers. On a couple of occasions I had to repeat the same jump again and again and just hope that it gripped, which eventually it did. The wall climb and jump is not very good, however, when it comes to precision. Since it seems majorly optimised for wide spaces, trying to use it in specific areas is bad, because you either slip into hazards very quickly down the wall, or, since you can only do one jump off the wall, it doesn't take you far enough. The more successful option is to try and start on a flat surface and double jump, because you get better control from the double jump than from the wall jump. It's not always consistent how far the wall jump springs you out as well, so you end up having to repeat these a bit. Luckily there was only one area that was of any significant issue. There aren't that many controls and the basic maneuvering controls aren't too tricky to figure out, but there are some features that it took me 2 goes at the game to actually compute. Since I keep talking about the blue squares, I'll start with those. There's no way to track how many you have, and they seem to exist to encourage you to explore the areas and look for hidden nooks and crannies to find them in and collect them. What does collecting them get you? Well, after 2 rounds I figured out absolutely nothing. That's right folks, you don't get a damn thing unless you count personal satisfaction, but I'm gonna assume most of you don't. Second time round I collected every single one of them and it made absolutely no difference to the game. The blue bar, however, does have a use, which took me a long time to figure out. The first round I had a full bar, found a door I thought maybe I needed to go in, and wondered if the blue stuff was some kind of power to activate it. I stood in front, poked buttons again, and suddenly got a noise. I tried to see what the difference was, but couldn't find one. And then my game controls froze, so I had to quit to the menu and start the whole game again. That isn't what the bar does though, luckily. The lumpy bar is your health. If you take a hit off the enemy, you lose half a lump in segments until you get to the bottom. If you've lost some of your health and have a full blue bar, you can press P to activate it. What that does then is fill your health back to full, and then it immediately starts to fade again until it's back to where it was. Essentially it's a temporary health boost to help you maybe weather 1 or 2 more hits and avoid dying. Speaking of dying, what is the impact of death in this game? It recharges your health bar. That's right, you can die as many times as you want and it does practically nothing to you. Your blue bar remains as full as it was when you fell down a hole or got killed, and your health then becomes full, so if you're getting low you might as well just kill yourself and respawn with full health to avoid interruptions later. There is a minor setback to death in that you can respawn earlier in the level, meaning you have to repeat a segment again. This is another thing it took me 2 rounds to figure out. I kept running past these flowers along the way and wondering what on earth they were for. Turns out they're respawn points, so when you die you go back to the last flower you activated. They look pretty out of place in the cyberpunk environment, including when they spawn in metal sewers, which is probably why I was so confused what they were there for. So yes, death is a setback, but also none of the levels are so big that it's that much of an effort to redo your progress. Adding all of this together, you may have some questions. such as, why do I need the ability to temporarily boost health and prevent dying if there's so little consequence to dying? Or, if I don't need the ability to boost health, why do I need to break boxes or fight enemies? Or even perhaps the question, why would I go out my way to collect the blue squares if they don't do anything? Bang, 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 3 nails on 3 heads. What the devs have managed to do is make a system of motivators and mechanics that essentially undo the impact of each other. The lack of consequence for dying and the reset of your health negates the need to ever boost your health in the first place, which undoes the box hitting mechanic and the need for the blue power bar, and the blue squares undo the extra platforming areas and the motivator for exploration because they contribute nothing. So adding this onto the lack of story, you have wall jumping and unmoving platforms so far. To the combat, you have one skill which you enact by mashing E. You can attack in the air or on the ground. There's no advancement to your combat ability, nor any mechanics that affect it. It's kind of just an add-on to give you something more to think about than the jumping. There are 2 types of enemies, tall ones and small ones. The small ones generally take 1 hit to kill, unless they take 2, and the big ones take 2 hits to kill, unless they take 3. You're seeing what my comment might be here, huh? There is no distinguisher to whether an enemy will take 1, 2, or 3 hits to kill. They all look the same, so you just have to mash until they die. They do detect you, even through crates, and will run toward you when they notice you. They are very fast, however, so you usually take a bit of damage, as if you have to jump onto a platform to fight them, they usually sprint at you before you land. Luckily, there's not much knockback and it has little impact. Mashing E just solves the problem for you. You can weather about 8 or 9 hits total, but as said, you can also just reset your damage by somersaulting into a hole any time. So really, the enemies aren't that much of a problem. Design, the last piece of the puzzle. I'll go for level design first, and I'll start with my most glaring issue with it. To progress into new areas in some places, you have to drop down gaps. In fact, the first area change in the entire game is dropping down off a building. However, in maybe the second or third area, there are also gaps between buildings, and guess what happens if you jump down there? You die. The last area, you drop down into the sewers to progress. You see this hole? You drop down to get a blue square. What happens if you drop the last bit? You die. There's no indication of which areas kill you if you drop into them and which areas you intentionally need to drop down into. Even the ones with the hazard signs toward the end are areas you can drop into, but some with no indicators just kill you. It would help a lot to have some kind of differentiator between which holes are good and which are bad, especially if you're going to start the game by encouraging people to drop down them. This was one place where I was glad for a lack of consequences to death. Otherwise, the general level design is pretty good. You have a mix of heights and variable paths, and had the blue squares been of any benefit, I'd be able to say it was good to have bottlenecks to force the player to explore other pathways. You were able to see squares to get, but had to figure out how to get to them. It was nice to drop down and climb up into other areas for versatility, and though it took a little getting used to for which buildings you could actually touch and which you couldn't, overall it became noticeable what could be interacted with and what couldn't. You had a mix of buildings and skyscrapers to scaffold and metal, to underground metal sewer tunnels and a gas station. There were lots of features to the environment and background, giving the setting authenticity, and the character designs were good. It wasn't always distinguishable which bugs were which, and it would have been nice to see some of the enhancements that were mentioned with the cybernetics on some of the character models, but it set the tone overall, and at the very least you could tell friend from foe with the bugs. The art itself is pixel art, which I always have respect for because it's difficult, and I can't fault them at all for what they did there. They threw in a bit of meme material and used bright colours for the neon signage, as well as fading shapes of objects into the darkness of the background. The animations were decent, there was stretch on the character when they fell, which sometimes looked a little odd, but your sprite was fluid and visually it was easy on the eye. The music was alright, but there was one track that seemed to play for about 80% of the game, another track that was a bit more lively that only really played at the gas station, and then what sounded like a muffled version of the first track for the sewer area. It was decent overall, though the first track could get pretty samey being played for so long, but it mostly fit the right tone and wasn't overbearing. One bug that's worth mentioning is that for some reason you can escape off the map at the end of one of the areas. It looks like there might be something up there, but there isn't. You just die. So if we put together everything we have in actuality, we get nice pixel art, decent music that can border on samey, 4 to 5 variations of environment, simple combat with 2 enemy types, simple platforming. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Is it a bad game? No, I wouldn't say so. It's playable, but I think its biggest flaws are absence of clarity and absence of consequence. The negative reviews are easy to understand, because if you don't manage to figure out the mechanics, you end up finishing the game the same way I felt when I finished it on the first run. In my notes I put, "No idea what the fuck happened," which isn't really the ending you want people sat with. The simplest way to phrase it is that the entire purpose of the game is figuring out the purpose of the game. There's no explanation of the story in the game content, there's no closure to the game story on the Steam page in the content, there's no clarity on the checkpoints, the power bar, the purpose of the squares that you want people to put extra effort into collecting to no avail. And if you don't give anyone the carrot, they're not going to chase. Because the extra level design areas are to segment the squares. If people don't get them because they're worthless, they're going to miss out on chunks of your game content. Which isn't only a deficit to them, realising they only need to play 50% of the game, but also a deficit to you as the devs because that's 50% of your work getting ignored. And please tell the players the controls, even if you put them as an image somewhere in the settings menu. A tutorial is always recommended, but having them written somewhere is better than nowhere. So you haven't set your game parameters or story parameters, so you're missing the carrot. But you're also missing the stick. If you don't want to entice, there's also no consequence to your mechanics. What happens if you don't get the squares? Well, nothing. What happens if you die to the enemies or to platforming poorly? Well, not a lot. You just restart from earlier briefly, but your health is back. So why kill the enemies if you don't need the charge you get from them? Maybe to get them out the way and make the platforming easier, but overall, not a lot really. You could just jump over all the enemies, and therefore your combat mechanic might even become obsolete. There are all the ingredients needed to make the burger here, and there's promise in the visual design, animation, and the core control and platforming. But the end result is 2 slices of bread with a tomato slice punched into the top, some lettuce stuck to the outside with melted cheese, and the worker ate the beef patty before they gave it to you. The pieces that make it a sandwich are there, if a little disorderly, but the meaty motivation of the story and game purpose hasn't been included. It took me about 40 minutes to play through without all the squares, so if they mattered, you could get some decent time out of it. It's a casual game to play, but if you want any sense of purpose, you won't get it, other than deciphering its purpose, which I can't really give points to because that's not what the game is supposed to be about. It's a pretty even split for me, so I'm gonna give Sect-Machina a 5 out of 10.